and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, the Federal Reserve has delivered its third quarter-point rate cut in a row, with policymakers maintaining their outlook for just one cut next year. The Fed chair voiced optimism that the U.S. economy will strengthen as the inflationary impact from tariffs fade away.
Today, the Federal Open Market Committee decided to lower our policy interest rate by a quarter percentage point. Available indicators suggest that economic activity has been expanding at a moderate pace. Consumer spending appears to have remained solid, and business fixed investment has continued to expand. There is no risk-free path for policy as we navigate this tension between our employment and inflation goals. As detailed in a statement released today by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, reserve management purchases will amount to $40 billion in the first month and may remain elevated for a few months. So I don't think that a rate hike is anybody's base case at this point.
Well, with us now is Derek Halpenny, Global Markets Head of Research at MUFG. Derek, it was exciting. I mean, look, if you look at the data points, it can kind of go either way. And you can see that nuance with the markets not being really quite sure if it was dovish or bearish.
Yes, the FOMC is divided. Yeah. Inflation is sticky and the labour market is weak. And I think in that context, the markets were fully expecting that. Two dissents in terms of on the hawkish side. I think maybe the markets were braced for, maybe three, so a little bit less there than maybe expected. And then when you look at the details of the breakdown of the dots, you still have 8 of the 19 looking for 2 cuts or more. So that's a pretty chunky size of the FOMC in that direction.
Derek, has the FOMC ever been so divided?
No, not in my time in terms of my recollections, and that's nearly 30 years of FX analysis.
We're much younger than that. But why?
Well, it is unusual in terms of this is post-COVID, post the largest global inflation shock since the late 70s, early 80s. And the labour market is definitely very weak. What I thought was interesting was this explicit estimate of the over-report in non-farm payrolls at 60,000. The 6-month running average is 59,000. So essentially there's been no jobs growth for 6 months. It would be very unusual, in my opinion, for the labour market just to suddenly pick up on its own. So I think the risks going forward is still that we see labour market weakness. And then our view is that the inflation related to tariffs, a lot of that could already be in the data. 3 of the last 4 months, import-sensitive components have jumped quite considerably. So if we start to see goods inflation stabilise, then I think overall inflation can start to come down, and then maybe the FOMC starts to look more unified.
But Derek, is this also just because of the K-shaped economy that we're seeing, that you're going to, it depends on also where you focus on, where you see risks or potential?
Yeah, well, vulnerability in terms of today, given what happened with Oracle, in terms of valuation of AI, that K-shaped economy, yes, the top 1/3 income percentile, not really that bothered by the cost of living issues and certainly benefiting from equities, where the bottom 1/3, absolutely not. We have a record low Michigan consumer confidence for the bottom 1/3 income percentile. That is incredible when you consider the equity markets. And also, why is Trump's economic approval rating, according to a YouGov poll, at -20, when throughout his first term in office it barely turned negative? So I just don't think the economy is humming and looking as good as maybe some believe.
Yeah, and we did actually, part of the show a couple of days ago on affordability and the fact that this is, from a political point of view, President Trump's main problem. So what are the markets pricing in? There does seem to be a bias on the markets that they'll go again in cutting because of Kevin Hassett, who we understand is a front runner to take over Jay Powell's job.
Yeah. Well, the dots say 1 cut, the markets say 2, our view is 3.
Perfect.
So, take your pick. But Kevin Hassett obviously coming in is just not going to have the influence of Powell. And look at how divided the FOMC is with Powell. So I think his ability to sway the FOMC is going to be very, very difficult. I do think, though, that there's not a huge change in the composition of the FOMC next year. You know, we don't know those 4 silent dissenters. In terms of the dots who wanted rates left on hold yesterday, you know, 2 hawks are leaving the FOMC, and maybe 2 hawks are coming in. And some of those votes could have been alternate members who don't come into the FOMC until 2027. So it's still quite unclear. But I think ultimately, in my view, given the labour market and given inflation coming down a bit, there's scope to do certainly more than what the Fed think, and I think they'll potentially cut three occasions.
3 up to what level? Because we're now talking about a possible jumbo cut. So is there a terminal? The UK policymakers are so reluctant about talking about a terminal rate, but actually in the US they talk about it a lot more openly. Yes,
and according to the Fed, it's around 3%. So whether it's 2 or 3, that's roughly where we get to next year. The Fed see that the following year. So, you know, I think that's reasonable, but that's not an accommodative stance. And if, say, for example, we got a correction in AI, a bigger equity market correction in 2026, going back to that K-shaped economy, we're very vulnerable to a big equity market correction that would probably prompt the Fed to have to do more.
Derek, what does it mean for dollar?
Well, the dollar dropped by about 0.7% yesterday. The front end 2-year dropped by 10 basis points. So, yeah, that's a decent move on FX. There is a bias into year end for dollar selling. So we could get up to maybe 118, even 119 by the end of the year in euro dollar. And then I think that opens us up for a break of 120 next year. And by the end of next year, we've got 124 for euro dollar.
Derek, I'm going to give you a curveball because I was quite surprised, and I know then he walked it back, but Sam Altman was talking about some of these big AI companies being almost systemic, right? Intimating that we could have a Lehman Brothers moment with that could need government intervention. Now, I know this is like maybe far-fetched, it's far off, but if there is something ugly in AI valuations, how does it translate into your world? Does it translate into your world?
Well, it does. Let's talk about, let's say, a 20-25% correction in the S&P that was AI tech-led over a relatively short period of time. I think there would be a kind of a divided, assuming the front-end rates go down quite sharply, which I think they would, the likes of the Swissy, I think even the yen, the euro would outperform the US dollar, but then the other high-beta global currency like Aussie, Kiwi, CAD, I think they would suffer. So you'd have a mixed performance. But overall, there is a core G10 that I think would do well in circumstances of the Fed having to cut more because of a bigger correction in equity markets.
I mean, who has most to lose between like the BOJ, the Bank of England, and the ECB if there was a large correction?
Well, I think the UK and Europe, but from a tech perspective specifically, you'd look at Japan, you'd look at Korea, you'd look at Taiwan, obviously, and if it's very tech specific, I think those would certainly be more vulnerable.
Yeah. Derek, this is the day where I just start talking about AI valuations. It's the world where actually you're looking at scenarios.
Yeah, it's a big move in Oracle, so it does show you the sensitivity of bad news on AI tech-related data or earnings.
Welcome to 2025. Derek, thank you so much. Derek Halpenny, Global Market Head of Research at MUFG. Now, the U.S. has intercepted and seized a sanctioned oil tanker off the Venezuelan coast in a serious escalation of tensions. Video released by the U.S. Attorney General shows heavily armed forces descending from a Black Hawk helicopter on the ship's deck. Venezuela has described it as an act of aggression.
Venezuela denounces and repudiates energetically what constitutes a blatant theft and an act of international piracy, announced publicly by the President of the United States.
Now, for more on this, we're joined by Bloomberg's EMEA News Director, Will Kennedy. Will, this feels significant. It's actually, if maybe someone told you this would happen a couple of months ago, you wouldn't believe it. Why did the U.S. seize the tanker, and what's been the impact on oil markets?
It's clearly an escalation in this pressure that the U.S. is trying to put on Maduro's regime in Venezuela. You can see how dramatic it is from the pictures that you've just shown to our viewers there. This tanker was sanctioned. It is part of the so-called shadow fleet. It has been involved in shipping Iranian oil to China, and it has, in the past, shipped Venezuelan oil to Iran, which is what it was doing when it was seized. So it is a clear escalation, and the regime is very dependent on oil revenue, so it can put pressure on the Maduro regime. In terms of the broader oil market, I think it's a mixed picture. Venezuela isn't a key supplier globally. It is significant but not vital to the oil market, and the disruption will be limited. The bigger question with Venezuelan oil actually is what happens if there is some kind of regime change in Venezuela, because then you could see a lot more oil come onto the market from Venezuela. And we had an interview with Mike Wirth, the CEO of Chevron, yesterday, who was the last US oil company in Venezuela, and he was quite clear he plans to stay there for the long haul and is talking to the Trump administration. So I think the market is actually thinking slightly longer term about this issue. So,
well, how tense are things between the US and Venezuela?
Well, it's part of a bigger picture. We've seen US warships go to the Caribbean, an aircraft carrier near to Venezuela. We've seen a lot of rhetoric against the Maduro regime, this constant drama of will there be direct strikes on Venezuela, the attacks on boats that the US alleges are being used for drug smuggling. It's all part of a broader picture. And then we had the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize recipient Machado arrive in Oslo. We're going to hear from her later today. So we've got the voice of the opposition in the mix. So it feels like a fluid situation in which tensions continue to rise. Clearly, the Trump regime is working towards some kind of Trump administration, I should say, some sort of change in the Venezuelan regime, and it feels like a fluid situation.
Well, thanks so much, Will Kennedy, there, Bloomberg's EMEA news director. Now, coming up, vaccine uptake falls in the U.S. with the arrival of a vaccine skeptic health secretary. We'll discuss the challenges with the co-founder of Moderna next. This is Bloomberg. The conversations that matter and the insights you need. This is The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, the U.S. Federal Drug Administration is expanding a safety review into COVID vaccines and whether there's a link to deaths in adults. Vaccine firms have struggled to keep up momentum as COVID business declines and as the Trump administration calls into question long-standing guidance on vaccines. Now, I could not be more pleased to be joined by Noubar Afeyan, the founder and chief executive of the biotech firm, flagship pioneer and previously co-founder of Moderna. Noubar, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here.
And you're in London, which I want to talk about in a second. But the FDA in the U.S. is investigating whether COVID vaccine caused, unduly deaths. What impact could it have on your businesses?
Well, I think the overall record, just last week, there was a big study, 20 million people studied in Europe, looking at the efficacy and safety of the vaccine. I think the data speaks for itself. It's an extremely effective approach to impact the hospitalization and death that comes from a pretty serious disease that may not be at a pandemic level, but continues to hurt lives. And I think that the FDA should do its job, which is to make sure it monitors. They're being asked to monitor. They're monitoring. And we will stand by the overall global data that exists, which is very strong.
Noubar, Moderna is also, developing more COVID-flu combination vaccines. Mm-hmm. How do you think the FDA would look at that?
I hope the same way they look at everything else, which is based on the facts and the evidence, but also importantly, as we apply this technology to cancer, where we're showing lives saved by the very large number of trials that we're doing, I think that people will begin to understand that the underlying science, mostly in American science, is coming through and is having big impact.
What's been the impact of the Trump administration cuts to mRNA research?
In the academic world, the NIH funding has been tapered. I think, again, there's a lot of confusion there, but I think ultimately it's difficult to bet against the science. You can do that for short periods of time, but then the impact shows up in unnecessary deaths, unnecessary diseases, and then eventually you go to tools that are robust and well proven, and that's what we expect will happen.
Is there a danger that the U.S. actually falls behind in this technology?
I think there's a big danger of that, and I think we're seeing it already. Clearly, this is all happening at a time when China, having invested quite strongly in the last few years, is coming on in every different aspect of biotechnology, and they don't have these concerns. They really do follow the science the way the U.S. has done for many decades, and I do think they're vying for being the leader globally in biotechnology. So it's an unfortunate time to doubt science, and more importantly, doubt the scientific method. But I think that we expect that voices will rise that will insist on the science and the evidence to speak. And when they do, I think that the American advantage in having been in this field for such a long time should sustain. But we'll see. It's concerning.
Noubar, you also mentioned cancer programs, which is an area where people expect a lot from Moderna. Can it go at it alone, or do you have to find partners in this?
We have a very significant partnership with Merck and have had for many years. So our cancer therapy, immunotherapy program, which is individualized patient-specific treatments, is being conducted in a joint project, 50-50 project with Merck, and we'll continue that. We're very excited by that. There are other approaches to cancer that Moderna is developing on its own that are complementary, not competitive, and all of that we think will play out. I mean, RNA, when we started 15 years ago, was a modular, programmable way to tell the body how to fight against disease. That capability across billions of people, thanks to COVID, has been borne out. Now the question is, which disease do we go after, and how do we make sure we maximize efficacy and minimize safety concerns, and we're doing that.
Do you expect some kind of other big agreement with a bigger company or a big company in certain parts? I know you're always in the news because of it.
Yeah, as a public pharmaceutical company, albeit a smaller one than the larger players we hear a lot about, we have to be always careful about what is being said. I think there's a lot of speculation. The fact is that the company has the resources, has the leadership, has the platform that I think most people would wish they had in this moment when we're looking for new solutions in the world, not just cheaper versions of old solutions. And I think, therefore, it's an attractive partner candidate for lots of people who have different disease area needs, and we're talking to lots of folks. As a result, there's always speculation, but I think we'll continue to build our core franchise. We think we're on a good path. How
do you look at AI actually in your field?
So AI broadly, and Moderna has been a big adopter of AI. They have a big partnership with OpenAI. We've had with IBM in quantum. But AI broadly, through Flagship Pioneering, the firm that I lead, is an extremely important contributor to what we do. We're entering 2026. We increasingly view AI as it relates to the biotech industry as accelerated innovation, because there's no force in the 38 years that I've been working in this field that has the kind of impact, not potential. Most people want AI to seem like it's in the future. The reality is that we're moving so much more quickly. I'll give you just one example. We have a company called Generate Biomedicines that computationally designed a protein, an antibody, that has now entered, just last month, phase 3 clinical trials in very large COPD asthma indications. And we expect over the next year to generate data. This will be, hopefully, a major blockbuster drug, and it came out of AI. And without it, we could not have gone through the millions of permutations it takes to find just the right kind of trade-off to get a very effective and long-lasting drug. This is going to happen by the thousands now, because the same platform can be applied many places.
But does it also mean that actually China, who we've seen become more innovative in terms of pharmaceuticals, could actually catch up?
Well, I think China has its own advantages in AI. They're working on smaller models, but distillation approaches. So I think China should be expected to be, we don't think of China as anything other than San Francisco or Boston or New York. In other words, it's not in some other kind of range of technology. They're playing at the cutting edge. Having said that, what we have, interestingly, is a long tradition of startups absolutely growing to become incumbents and transforming industries. They don't have that experience yet. It's a very recent phenomenon for them. They're a state-run entity by and large. So we need to double down on the unique advantage of the American innovation entrepreneurship ecosystem and really get a lot of the impediments out of the way to just let these companies compete. And while we're at it, I think Europe should follow that same lead. The competition will be the life form, the companies, the organizations that can most effectively use AI, use the knowledge from diseases to make a big impact. Wherever those exist, I think you're going to see them flourish.
But are you investing more in the UK?
So we're much more active in the UK. We're first creating a lot of bridges between our ecosystem of 45 companies that are in the Boston area into the UK. We've done that for the last 3 years. We're now significantly, potentially ramping up with partnerships with the UK government, with a number of big research institutions, the CRIC, the Cambridge, Oxford, etc. So we're very much kind of in the conversation of, could there be potentially a £500 million pound type structure that could make a big impact here, particularly not in just investing, but also creating new companies, in an institutional way and scaling them up. We have that capability in Boston. We've done this for 25 years, and we think it's time to look at it in one or two select locations.
What do you see that's good in the UK? Because this is quite refreshing since the budget and actually since this government has been in place, not everyone's ready to say, look, I want to do business in the country.
Honestly, I get asked this question a lot, and I'd say many things. I don't have to look very hard. The scientific base is there. That means that the talent is there. The innovation, inventions are there. The capital is there, but it seems to be ignoring the value created from science. You know, this has been a knowledge-based economy here for quite a long time, and yet that seems to be, you know, there's easier ways to make money than to bet on science. But science can make dramatic returns. So I think developing the skills, the experience, the confidence is what's been lacking, and I think we can bring that to bear.
How do you see the talent pool of researchers? This is
excellent.
It doesn't.
Excellent.
They're not being taken from a lot of the big tech companies.
You know, I think AI is beginning to flourish here because there is the right mix of kind of the living conditions, the academic institutions. And it's not a surprise that DeepMind is primarily kind of flourishing here. And I think that many AI, we have a company called Lila Sciences, which is leading the way in autonomous science. We're building, think of it as the Waymo for scientific discovery. Self-driving labs, self-driving, where the whole wheel of science, the hypothesis all the way through conclusions, is being done in fully automated ways. That group, for example, Lila, is a 3-year-old project that we've just recently revealed, is looking at establishing part of what's doing here to be able to tap into the talent. So I think the talent's there. What you need is confidence and vision to get to a whole nother scale, which is beginning to show up. And I think we're hoping to help import that here by finding the right partnerships.
Okay, well, it's good news for us because you can come on TV much more often.
Well, if needed, sure.
Thank you for joining us. Noubar Afeyan, the Chief Executive of Flagship Pioneering and co-founder of Moderna. Coming up, Wikipedia approaches its 25th anniversary. We'll discuss what it means to build a trust in an age of misinformation. Our interview with the co-founder, Jimmy Wales, is next, and this is Bloomberg. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London, and these are your top stories. The U.S. Federal Reserve cuts for the third time in a row, but the split vote reflects growing division amongst policymakers. The U.S. seizes a sanctioned oil tanker off the coast of Venezuela in a serious escalation of tensions. Venezuela's leaders describe it as an act of piracy. Plus, Oracle slumps pre-market as earnings from the AI bellwether disappoint. So let's get more on that story. And Oracle's spending on infrastructure has jumped 40%, while cloud revenue fell short. Matt Bloxham, senior analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, joins us now. Matt, good morning. So Oracle did bet heavily on cloud infrastructure, yet shares dropped. So what are investors weighing up?
Yeah, they're trying to figure out this relationship between capital spending and revenue and profit coming into the business. And yeah, as you mentioned there, they surprised people yesterday with a 42% increase in their capital spending for this year, going from 35 billion to 50 billion. They say that's directly linked to customer demand, not making that operational in their data centers. But, we're not seeing incremental revenue momentum. And so that's kind of what's making people scratch their heads a little bit. And obviously, this is a company that lost 10 billion of cash flow in the quarter. It's got over 100 billion of debt. It's signed up to all sorts of kind of long-term leases on data centers. So I think people are kind of concerned that the business model isn't quite what they were looking for, and there's still a lot to figure out.
So Matt, how does Oracle actually steady the ship moving forward? And has it leaned too heavily on high-profile AI partnerships?
Yeah, I mean, it clearly is heavily exposed to a small number of companies, particularly OpenAI. It's got $500 billion of forward revenue to come into the business, but that's heavily linked to the success of OpenAI. I think what they're trying to do, and what they tried to do yesterday, was to show people that there are all sorts of ways they can bring revenue on board and that it's not all hugely cash flow draining. I think to some degree that kind of optionality on business models almost adds too much confusion and complexity to the mix. I think investors are looking for clarity on what the business model is, how it works, so they can make sense of it. They also, tried to reassure people yesterday that their investment grade credit rating is really important to them. I think so. Just trying to ease people's concerns that their eye isn't off the ball. They're conscious about cash flow generation, the nervousness amongst credit investors, and they're not going to do anything to kind of jeopardize the overall financial strength of the company.
Matt, thank you so much. Matt Bloxham there from Bloomberg Intelligence. Now, next month, Wikipedia will celebrate the 25th anniversary of its founding. The English edition of the free online encyclopedia has grown to include more than 7 million articles, all written collaboratively by volunteers. Well, joining us now is Jimmy Wales, Wikipedia's co-founder and author of the 7 Rules of Trust. Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us. This is a nice, easy read. It's an important as actually we try and figure out what the hell's going on amongst chief executives and politics and whether we have broken that trust. First of all, why write, on trust now in 2025?
We've seen this huge decline in trust. If you look at the Edelman Trust Barometer survey, it's been going on for quite some time. Decline in trust in journalism, in politics, in business. And yet Wikipedia has gone from being kind of a joke in the early days to one of the few things people trust. So I thought, let's share some of the lessons and let's see what we can do to move society back to a culture of trust and trustworthiness.
Why do you think, actually, Wikipedia is doing so well in a time where there's so much misinformation and people don't tend to trust news sources?
Yeah, I think it really has to do with transparency, openness. It has to do with having a good purpose. We keep the purpose of Wikipedia very, very simple. Free, high-quality, neutral encyclopedia. And people are inspired by that. And actually, there's huge thirst by the public for clear, honest information. And that's become more important in a time with so much misinformation floating around on social media and so forth.
So given all of the changes with tech and AI, do you think you could start Wikipedia now? Or if you'd start it, how would you start it differently?
I do think so, because I'm a pathological optimist about human nature, and I think people have a desire to know and to share what they know. We can get a very negative view of human nature if we spend too much time on social media, but realistically, this is the kind of thing people love, and so I think that's still true today.
There have been a couple of pages where you've had to block editing because it was too emotional, because it was too divisive, I guess, right?
Yeah.
How often has that happened since you founded it?
It's sort of a regular thing, if a big fight breaks out, then the administrators, who are also community members, will temporarily lock a page to sort of let emotions settle. And there's always something going on. There's always a bit of drama somewhere in Wikipedia, of course. But we have this real sense that we should be civil to each other. That's one of the 7 rules of trust is, be civil, be kind to other people. No personal attacks is one of the fundamental rules of Wikipedia. Of course, we're human, so it can get rough and tumble sometimes, but we really do believe in that. We're not a wide open free speech forum. We're an effort to make something fun.
Your 7 rules of trust are, they couldn't be clearer. It also couldn't be more simple. It's kind of stuff that we want to teach our kids. It's, be positive about people, make it personal, create a clear purpose, be trusting, be civil, be independent, be clear. Why do you feel we need to go to these basics?
Well, I think it's as with everything. If you're in a business that's had some kind of a crisis of trust, and it can happen to the best of businesses, something goes wrong, you've lost the trust of your customers, your partners, I think you need to take a trust inventory. You need to go back to these basics and just think through, okay, what do we need to do differently? What are the things that we should internalize with our staff, with each other, to try to rebuild trust? Because you can rebuild trust.
Do you worry about AI and the impact this could have on encyclopedias or news?
I worry. I'm excited. It's a big change, and there's so much going on. Certainly, I think there's huge opportunities in AI, but there's also all these risks that everybody talks about. And so we're taking a very cautious approach. We're very human-centric. We're a community first. But we're also looking at, okay, how could AI help the community? What are the ways that the community might use AI to help us spot errors, to, sort of whatever it might be, you know.
Yeah. So how do you think Wikipedia will change in 5-10 years? Does it become bigger? Does it become smaller?
I think we'll probably be pretty much the same. I mean, hopefully bigger. I mean, obviously, the amount of knowledge in Wikipedia is always growing, and our ability to do more things is great. But, you know, the fundamentals won't change. We're not going to become TikTok or something like that. You know, we're Wikipedia, and we like that.
Do you have agreements, actually, with some of these large language models so that they take the information from Wikipedia, or because it moves so fast, it's almost impossible?
Yeah, we have agreements with some. They crawl the website. Everything's open source, so they're free to take it. Yeah. But they're hammering the website, and we would like them to stop hammering the website and instead use our enterprise product. So we've got deals with Google's been a good anchor customer. We've got deals with some of the other big players. We've got a few more we're arm twisting to say, come on. And we've just started to block some of the crawlers that aren't playing nice.
Right. So what do you spend most of your time on? Is it trying to, again, look at the business model of Wikipedia going forward?
We spend, I would say, most of our time is really thinking about community health. Is the community happy? Are we having fun? Are we doing productive work? I spend personally a lot of time working on neutral point of view policy and really thinking about that. And we're looking at that across all the languages, sort of doing an evaluation. Because as you know, we get accusations of being biased and so forth. And my view on that is you can't ignore it. You have to take it seriously and say, OK, well, let's take a check. Let's really be serious about that.
And so is there an internal process if someone accuses?
Yeah. We've got a neutral point of view working group, and we've got researchers, and we're coming up with guidelines and things like this. And who knows? It's going to be a long-term process over the next year.
I mean, I've seen you at events around the world. I don't know whether you speak to a lot of country heads, and actually what they ask you, whether they're worried about some of the lack of trust also in politicians, and maybe what an engine such as Wikipedia can do to restore that trust, not only in communities, but actually in countries.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's something that we have to look at fundamentally throughout society. A lot of politicians are quite rightly worried about the loss of trust in the process of democracy and politics. Obviously, some of those politicians are actively undermining that trust for their own purposes. So, what I'm saying to voters is we should really care about trustworthiness almost more than we care about policy in many cases.
But what's the difference, when you look at trustworthiness, what about divisiveness?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
is it one and the same?
They're very closely related, obviously. I mean, the toxicity of certain debates is also a product of that lack of trust. When we saw the government shut down in the U.S., the longest one ever, part of it was they couldn't come to any kind of compromise where they could make a deal because they didn't trust the other side to live up to the terms of the deal. So, okay, well, we need bipartisan work to actually get the functioning of government done. And if you think the other side is completely crazy and not trustworthy, it's really hard to work together. And so we really need to get back to building and rebuilding the trust.
Why has there been a fundamental shift in actually not believing or not trusting the other side?
I think there's a lot of reasons. I mean, one that I point to that's a really hard problem is the decline of local journalism has been really problematic. People used to have local reporters, and they would see stories reported and things they could see and touch and so forth. And that's declined all around the world, which now means most of the news is about famous people in far-off places, and you don't have that same personal connection to it. I'd love to figure out how can we get back to good, strong local journalism. And then, of course, one of the things that we have seen is that the decline in trust has been largely, due to social media, due to clickbait headlines and all of that. I'm really excited about the rise of subscription models again, that instead of just having to get the clicks today to get people on your site, you actually build trust with your reader over time, and they're happy to pay you for that.
Yeah, is there a concern, though, under the subscription model that you only see what you want to see, that it kind of reinforces what you're thinking?
Maybe not, except for I think there's a big demand for people to actually see both sides of a story. A lot of the free stuff actually ends up being very one-sided because you're just trying to appeal to one audience. I think if somebody's going to pay you, they kind of want the whole story.
Jimmy, so good to speak to you. Thank you so much for coming on. Jimmy Wales, Wikipedia co-founder and author of The 7 Rules of Trust. It's a short book, So it's a great read, and it's short. The chief executive of the chip equipment maker, ASML, believes the huge investments being made in AI infrastructure are justified. ASML is Europe's most valuable company and a crucial pillar of the global AI supply chain, selling cutting-edge gear to customers such as NVIDIA, Apple, and TSMC. Speaking last month, Christophe Fouquet told Bloomberg Tech Europe there is logic behind the massive spending by the likes of OpenAI.
I think the investment makes sense overall, because you cannot play in AI without investing in hyperscaler. And there may be even a few cycles of investment, because the investment today is done on certain chips. The chips in 2-3 years from now, if you look at NVIDIA announcement, they will be a lot more powerful. And people may be tempted again in 2027 to invest again in hyperscaler to make use of those chips. So you have different cycle, and you have a bit of a arms race, because if you don't invest today, you're out.
And you can watch more of that exclusive interview with the ASML CEO tomorrow on the next episode of Bloomberg Tech Europe. That's at 6:30 a.m. UK time on Bloomberg. Ukraine has sent a revised peace plan to Washington as President Trump held a call with European leaders. Now, Trump says pretty strong words were exchanged with the leaders of France, the UK, Germany as well, while discussing the war. Bloomberg's chief Europe correspondent Oliver Crook joins us now from Brussels. Ollie, can you walk us through what exactly happened yesterday?
There was a huge amount of activity yesterday for Ukraine, Francine. There was that call, obviously, between European leaders and Donald Trump. And at the same time, we understand that that sort of document, that 20-point plan, that's really the foundation for any kind of peace proposal between Russia and Ukraine, got some edits from the Europeans, got some edits from the Ukrainians, and is now sitting with the White House for the review of the President Trump and the rest of the negotiating team and the United States. We also understand that there was a discussion between Volodymyr Zelensky, this is a conference call, and a number of high-ranking Ukrainian officials, Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Jared Kushner, who appears to be in every single meeting potentially that's happening on Ukraine and every other subject, and also, of course, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, and that was to deal with the potential and the eventual reconstruction of Ukraine. And Volodymyr Zelensky called that meeting, he considered that the first meeting of the group that will work on a document concerning reconstruction and economic recovery in Ukraine. So, Francine, that's two documents. There's the main 20-point plan, there's a reconstruction document, but there's also a third document, Francine, that we understand, and that is all about security guarantees. And I've got to say, this has got to be probably one of the most challenging issues still outstanding within the situation, the negotiations for Ukraine and Russia. What is the security architecture that will guarantee Ukrainian sovereignty into the future, that will guarantee that Russia will not invade? That is one of the stickiest points, and that is the third document. We do not have a great deal of clarity of where that rests, but we are waiting now any kind of response from the Trump administration, how they sort of read these additions that the Europeans have put, and of course the reaction from Moscow we still have not heard.
So we also have the European finance ministers meeting today. What can we expect there?
Yeah, I think for them, there's going to be a number of issues they have to talk about. They have to elect the new Eurogroup president. That's one of the issues they're going to talk about. They're going to kick off the search for the next VP at the ECB. So a number of the different issues they're going to be handling. But I think the main issue is dealing with the architecture and the framework and exchanging views on what to do with these Russian assets. This, of course, is one of the key issues for the Ukrainians going forward. They could theoretically, the EU, unlock 90 billion euros worth of reparations loans that would go to Ukraine. That would fund Ukraine's war effort and their budget for the next 2 years. 2/3 of the funding would be represented by that 90 billion euros. But Francine, despite what we hear from European leaders that they're close to a deal, that they should sign off on one next year, we do not have that confidence yet from the Belgians. I spoke with the Portuguese finance minister a little bit earlier today, and he says that yes, the frozen assets are one of the issues on the table, but there was not total confidence that this is going to get passed within the next 10 days. So I think it'll be absolutely crucial to hear what finance ministers have to say about the Russian assets and how they see this resolving themselves. As you know, we've been speaking to Volodymyr Zelensky when I sat down with him a couple of weeks ago. He says on the Russian assets and to get the funding for the war that this is a matter of survival for Ukraine. It is a matter of survival for their war effort and absolutely crucial. Will the Europeans deliver? That, Francine, is the perennial question.
Ollie, thanks so much. Bloomberg's chief Europe correspondent Oliver Crook. Now, coming up, the UK Chancellor defends her budget, which was described as uninspiring and disappointing by our next guest. We'll talk about all of that with Jim O'Neill. He's next, and this is Bloomberg. The conversations that matter, the insights you need. This is The Pulse, and I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, the former UK Prime Minister, Theresa May, has downplayed the threat posed by Nigel Farage's Reform UK party, which leads opinion polls. In a wide-ranging interview on Leaders with me, Francine, May also discussed her handling of Brexit, global diplomacy, and the future of the Conservative Party.
Reform makes a lot of noise. Reform has, now, is it 4 or 5 MPs currently?
But in the polls,
yes,
they're doing very well in the polls.
But the only poll that ever counts is the general election. That is some years away.
You don't seem to be threatened by Nigel Farage.
There's always a role for a centre-right party. And I think that's what the Conservative Party is about. Nigel Farage's economic policies, frankly, they're all over the place. It's all very well doing well in opinion polls, but when it comes to it, people want to ask who should be in government. Critical to that will be the economy.
And you can watch that full interview tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. in the UK or on the Bloomberg website on the terminal from tomorrow morning. Now, the British Chancellor has condemned leaks in the run-up to last month's budget as damaging and unacceptable. Rachel Reeves yesterday told MPs there were too many unauthorized leaks which conveyed inaccurate information about her budget. Now, for more on all of this, we're joined by Jim O'Neill, member of the UK House of Lords, former UK government minister and former chair of Goldman Sachs Asset Management. Jim, as always, thank you so much for joining us. How would you describe the state of the UK right now? Is it okay for investment? Do businesses like it here, or do you have concerns about the government's attachment to business and what happened in the budget?
All of those things, Fran. I think there is a latent underlying positive sort of core hope, let's call it, about the UK, partly because I think more and more people can identify the things that need to be dealt with to really turn it back into an exciting place to invest. I just published something via Project Syndicate on some of the big obvious things to me. And then, but against that is this sort of slightly ongoing chaotic state of our political situation, including now of the government, despite it having more than 160 seat majority, which really is quite bizarre. And the fact that the budget was effectively designed to try and keep the peace and some stability inside the government's party, the Labour Party. And that's, I saw your interest. I mean, that's why I found it so uninspiring. You know, for a government that is so far behind in the opinion polls, and it's pretty obvious as to why that is the case, and given that it is so still early on in their parliament, you know, I would have thought the time for much bolder choices to make sure the OBR and the forecasting community want to get more optimistic. They should be doing it now.
Right. So what would you do that's much more bolder? Is it kickstarting growth? Is it an industrial plan?
I mean, it's those things and more. So, you know, before the Angela Rayner thing started, you know, I was, turns out to have been quite naively, pretty optimistic that something of substance was going to happen on, you know, proper big picture property tax reform. You know, economists disagree on endless things, but those that look at these issues in the UK, it's one of the really few that virtually everybody agrees on, that we have a completely crazy property tax system that adds to the social immobility of the country and contributes dramatically to the price problems and disincentives through the stamp duty and so on. But they didn't really do anything about it other than introduce yet another council tax ban, which effectively was labelled as a mansion tax to shut up the left wing of the party. I would get rid of the triple lock. What is really interesting in the background to the budget is at the margin, the Tory party and the Reform Party are shifting on this. And they're the ones that would politically lose more of their base than the current government. So I don't understand why the government just doesn't get on and do something about that as well.
Is it because they're trying to please too many people in their party? Do they have too many constituents that they're trying to please the voters? They just want to make sure that they don't lose their job for now.
I mean, I think effectively it boils down to some version of that. Yes, it's the only logical conclusion I can make about what was, in terms of a government that supposedly committed to growth as their #1 mission, didn't offer any real initiatives to result in any change to any independent person's view of the future growth performance.
What happens from now? Jim, does the government actually realize, I mean, was this just a first budget and then they can, you know, is there hope that actually they change something to put the UK on a better path starting in the spring? Or is this it?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I found myself the whole few days after the budget feeling pretty down as to you know, is this it? And I don't know whether there's just some hope. I mean, another angle of it that I naively misunderstood too, in some of the briefing that was clearly coming out of the government, that they were focusing on cost of living measures, I thought what they would end up announcing would result in an even more optimistic profile about CPI for next year and beyond. But at the margin, the OBR actually revised up the CPI forecast, so there wasn't even that either. So, and I say that because I thought one of the ways they might be going, because of the politics, is to hope that there would be much bigger interest rate cuts, and that might help kickstart more growth. But, you know, seen by the market's reaction, there's no major shift in the gilt market's expectation for rate cuts either. But at some point, and I suggest it to people I know well that are part of the government and advising them, and they get quite annoyed with me, and they're probably going to be annoyed if they can be bothered or aware of what I'm saying here, but they're going to have to break some of these constraints that they've put on themselves, even though they don't really want to recognise it now, because their #1 mission is growth, and the reason why so many people in the country are disappointed is because they feel and see no signs of any of that, not only coming now, but anytime soon.
Yeah. Do you think the Chancellor stays?
You know, I don't know. I don't know, and to some degree, you know, that's nothing I'm particularly interested in. But I really personally have a lot of time for Rachel. And I suspect she's being constrained by number 10's issues with managing their own party. But I'm an independent peer. I like to think much bigger than that. I'm interested in the interests of the country. You know, and again, in this piece I wrote in the Project Syndicate, there are, despite our endless disappointments with whichever government we seem to have, there are one or two big picture things starting to slowly improve. I often talk to you about the remarkably improving situation in Greater Manchester and parts of the north. You know, I'll say it again because a lot of people don't get it. Greater Manchester is growing at 3 times the rate of London. And the stuff that's gone on with devolution that's important for that. And we have some big changes.
We're going to talk more about that, Jim.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Jim O'Neill there, House of Lords.